Well, the old saying is a verbal contract isn't worth the paper it's written on. Well, it turns out it might be, because many deals are done with a chat and a handshake, but those agreements could possibly be enforced in court. Alex Martin is a litigation specialist and director of Taurus Legal Management. He's joined us on the program before and he's back with us again. G'day, Alex.
Good morning, Stephen. It's great to be back.
So, verbal contracts, are they worth the paper they're written on?
Yes. Well, I think it's a common misunderstanding that if you don't write something down, that it's not binding. I've certainly had clients say to me, "Oh, well, I never agreed to anything," and what they actually mean is they never wrote anything down. They agreed to lots of things verbally, and the reality is that verbal contracts are just as binding in law as written contracts. There's no difference in law.
So we're not just talking necessarily about business transactions here. They can be social. There can be, I guess, social transactions as well, so to speak.
Yeah, that's right. In order to have a binding agreement, you have to have an exchange. So it can't be a gift. You can't just promise to do something. But if you promise to do something in exchange for someone else doing something else, so I'll do X for Y, then you do have a binding contract, whether that's social or business. Now, I think in a business context, there's a lot more at stake, but even in social, you can have a social contract. You can have an agreement that's binding that is outside of business context. That's right.
So once upon a time, this kind of situation would have been he said, she said. These days, though, with modern methods of communication, I imagine it's easier to identify, well, not necessarily a paper trail, but some sort of trail when it comes to an agreement.
Yes, that's absolutely right. I think gone are the days where you could just say, oh, that conversation didn't happen. I mean, we've got emails, we've got text messages, we've got social media, we've got electronic banking, there's GPS on your phone, there's all sorts of, you're being tracked and documented everywhere you go. And we've certainly run a lot of cases where a conversation was denied, but then the very next day an email sent which follows up on the conversation or which expands on some things were discussed. It's pretty hard to say there was no discussion in that context because the email says otherwise.
So, I mean, what's your advice to people? I mean, we still want to be able to sit down and have a coffee with people without thinking that we're going to end up in court. How do you avoid the pitfalls?
Yes, sure. So I think the first thing you've got to understand what a contract is. And as I mentioned before, a contract is an exchange. So where you've agreed to do something in exchange for something else, then there's a risk of a contract. And I think common sense prevails. If you think you've entered an agreement with someone, if you think you've got a contract with someone, then you probably have. If there's been an exchange of promises, verbally or in writing, or partly verbally, partly in writing, then you're bound by that. And if you start to act on it, and the other party starts to act on it, then there's often evidence that it exists. So I think people have just got to exercise their common sense. If they think there might be a contract, then there probably is.
Well, therein lies the problem, because common sense isn't very common these days.
Yes. Well, that's very true. I think it's people have got to sort of use their judgment about these sort of things. I think the big issue is around whether you've got a negotiation or a contract. Sometimes people are negotiating about something and they're not sure whether the negotiation has reached conclusion. And I think in that case, you just drop someone an email or a note saying, look, we've discussed this, but we haven't reached a landing or whatever, because I think that's the biggest risk area.
Yeah, it's certainly an area that's, fraught with danger. Alex, always good to talk to you. We'll catch up again soon.
Thanks, Stephen. Nice to talk to you.
All the best. Alex Martin, litigation specialist and director of Taurus Legal Management. Time to have a look at sport.